Okay, Chase Kahwinhut Earles is an enrolled member of the Caddo Nation of Oklahoma. His work has garnered multiple awards, including first place at the 2013 Santa Fe Indian Market, Santa Fe, Best of Show at the 2015 Cahokia Mounds Contemporary Art Show. I literally could read a list of like 75 awards, so I'm not going to do that. Just know that they are all in there. His pottery is included in the permanent collection of the Museum of the Red River in Oklahoma, the Audie Murphy Museum in Texas, and Caddo Mound State Historic Site in Alto, Oklahoma. We are very excited that Chase came all the way from Oklahoma to be here. Thank you for being here in person. I am going to share this.
All right, Kuaha Sedante Dikidanaha. Kumakia Kahwinhut. My name is Chase Kahwinhut Earles. I am Caddo, the Caddo tribe. And most people have not heard of Caddo. So I always kind of give them a little introduction to Caddo whenever I talk. We're a southeastern tribe located around the Red River, which is around Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas. And we are a Mississippian tribe, depending on who you ask. And we are a mound building tribe and southeastern ceremonial, and that's kind of our background. So we are a very ancient tribe. I'm giving you a history lesson, right? You want to talk about art? I'm going to do this really quick, so then we'll have a test afterwards. So but it gives the reason I do this is so it gives you context of like where I'm coming from, my perspective and my tribe and our cultural identity. It's really important because that's kind of what I'm about. And like I said, most people are not familiar with the Caddo, although we were one of the most influential tribes in the Southeast dealing with the Spanish and the French, the whole state of Texas. Texas is a Caddo word that means allies. So this is kind of our area. We were a confederacy of a lot of different tribes. And what I want to press upon people the most is how ancient the Caddo were. So we were around, and the Wichita Pony and Arikara Kitsai grew up and evolved out of us. We were that ancient. We traded with Pueblos that are no longer even there. We are around before a lot of the major mound sites, and we're still here. We were here before the Aztecs. We're still here. So we had a very ancient pottery traditions. Circle. And so because we were a very agricultural and very diplomatic tribe, we were able to have a stable existence in the same place for, archaeologists like to say 1,000-2,000 years. It's more like 10,000 years in the same area. So I'm going to run through these. This is mound building. And the one in the top left is actually Cahokia, but it's one of our sister tribes through kin. We traded with them, but we also live there. And then the rest are our ceremonial mound building tribes. Agricultural, corn, beans, and squash. But really, our corn was directly given to us from Mesoamerica. So it's a little tiny purple corn. So we have, back to pottery, a lot of influence in our pottery from Mesoamerica. There's literally a road that was beaten through walking that goes straight south from our village areas down into Mesoamerica and even probably South America. There's a lot of influence from Peruvian area. This is kind of our area, homeland, and all the major rivers that are around us. We were river people, historic chiefs. This is some of like our other artworks. We lived in thatched houses, not teepees. One of the last villages. All right. So I always kind of start with our what we call ancient or ancestral pottery, and this is kind of the foundation, the basis of where I come from. So our pottery, being thousands of years old, became one of the really fine wares of the Southeast, traded all the way to Germany, Spain, England. You can still find pieces of our pottery in the museums over there. And our pottery is actually in a lot of the museums all over this country. thousands. I think their last count was 65,000 pieces of Caddo pottery spread around the nation. But most people have never heard of Caddo pottery because a lot of it cannot be seen because the pottery becomes burial items at the end of your life. So most all of the existing ancient pieces are burial items and are not fit to be seen publicly. These are examples that come from Cahokia on the left, um, and on the right is my version. So when I first started out and learned about our pottery tradition, it became very important to me to learn how we made our pottery, learn our, language of symbology, and basically understand what our cultural identity in clay is. Um, so at the beginning, I would admit it was a lot of replication, which was okay with me right now because that's actually how the Caddo did pottery. We replicated the same typology over and over and over again so that you have thousands of years, generations of the same pot. So I learned that way. And then as an artist, grew to start, wanting to express myself as an artist, fine art, and to start doing interpretive work. So I still do what I consider very traditional pottery, and I have evolved into start making statements, reinterpretation pieces, fine art, and sculpture. Here's some examples of ancient pieces of Caddo pots. Uh, if our pottery had a huge variety of pieces, um, but mostly all earthenware, all hand coiled, and then all fired in a bonfire without we call it pit firing, but there's no pit. It's just open ground wood fired. And then a lot of them are engraved afterwards. We have different kinds of pottery between ceremonial pieces that are shiny and engraved and fineware. So when we talk about how skilled Caddo pottery is, it's hard to just look at it. I think you only get half the picture. Of course, nowadays you can't really hold our ancient pieces, but if you can, they are light as air. They're eggshell thin. So some of the pieces are between 1 and 2 millimeters thin throughout the whole body. And so that's where I strive to make my pieces like that when they're very traditional. I have a couple of examples in the show of that, um, but it's really apparent in larger pieces when you can just pick it up with like your fingers and it's this big. Um, so here's some ancient examples. I'm just going to throw in some other stuff there. My presentation is I use for a lot of different places, and it can be, I told someone, like 3 or 4 or 5 hours long. So I'm really condensing it down. Just giving you a quick Caddo. So I'll dive into my work. So this is some of my traditional work. As you can see, the little speckles in the pieces that is mussel shell. So where I wanted to start with this is how I started learning to make our traditional Caddo pottery is by actually making the clay itself the way we would have made it. So not going and getting stoneware mountainous clay and not getting other kinds of clay, I would go to the rivers and lakes and dig that alluvial, what I call really dirty clay that's, earthenware. It has a lot of junk in it. That's my technical term. And it fires at a really low temperature. It's always usually a brownish, reddish, chocolatey color that fires to a red buff. Um, but one of the traditional and ancestral tempers that we would put in our clay is mussel shell, which is a very temperamental material to use because there's a lot of limitations and things you have to watch out for. So I literally hand gather the clay, digging it, and then hand gather the mussel shell and crush the mussel shell up. There's a lot of steps in there I'm missing. And integrate the two, reform the clay, and then let it age. So one of the things with Caddo pottery is we would let it age probably for a month before it's usable. and then we can hand build the pieces. Um, Mussel shell clay doesn't really stick to mussel shell, so when you're doing the surface treatments, um, the clay comes off of the specks of mussels that are embedded, so that's why you can see all the little mussel shells inside of it. It is used as a temper to help it when it's drying. Extremely thin, 2 millimeter thick walls will tend to warp and crack. That mussel shell helps it to not do that. Also, when you are quick firing in an open ground bonfire, you're going from 0 to 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit in like 2 minutes. And that's all it really needs. That mussel shell helps hold it together without cracking. So I could literally throw my green pieces in the fire. I could take them out and just throw them in water, and they would be all right. It's kind of crazy. This handmade clay, the way we would have made our traditionally in the ancient way, is a lot different, like worlds different than what I consider or what I call commercial clay today. There's a lot of rules that are changed. You can have air pockets. You don't have to knead it. You don't, there's a lot of things that are different. Um, it doesn't need a slow ramp on firing. Um, so anyway, the way I create them is usually or always hand coil or a little bit of flattened coil, which is almost kind of like slabbing. And they're all hand formed and very thin. I have to build them very slow so that they don't slump or collapse while I'm building them, so that that 2 millimeter thick wall can hold the next coil, building it up. So large pieces tend to take, 3 weeks to build. Smaller pieces can take a week or so. The shininess comes from burnishing. So I was talking to someone earlier today about, modern, what I call modern day clay and glazes being really shiny, and how, as a native artist, that shininess is actually created with a cost. It is extremely important. There is extreme amount of labor that goes into making the piece shiny. It has to be hand burnished, and that means taking a little river rock and rubbing the dry green clay over and over and over again, and then doing it again, and then doing it again, uh, in order to get a shine like this on your pot so there's no glaze. That gives it a shiny treatment before you do all that work before you even fire it. It goes into the bonfire. There's one at the top. It's so small. I don't know if I have a bigger picture of it. No, I do not. And then, but it's just an open bonfire. And then after it's fired, I go back after the piece is fired and engrave it by hand, the designs. So you're digging through the carbon trapping on the outside down into the lighter colored clay body, which is also painful. so, but making the clay, I want to emphasize, is at least half of the entire process. It takes at least half the time or more to make the clay. Um, it is more labor making the clay than the actual piece. We have a lot, as you can see on the right here, it's kind of a bipod piece. So that's our influence from Peru, South America. These are ancient pieces. So our tribe also made a lot of what we call effigy pieces, but it's kind of like the precursor to sculpture. They were all vessels. They were all made to be vessels to carry something either physical or spiritual. Um, and so that there's a lot of animals, and they would all be from our homeland. So these are little bears. Even the one in the bottom left that looks like a little piggy is a bear. There were no piggies back in ancient times here. And the top left is actually an alligator snapping turtle. One of the really cool things I think is the evolution of effigies into abstraction, so that like it doesn't even have a head. We know what it is, and then over time the pieces just become so abstracted that like they don't even look like animals anymore. But this is their origins, right? A couple more of my pieces. This piece on the left is in the Gilcrease Museum in Oklahoma. Alligator garfish effigy. Again, I like using animals from our homelands, of course, because it is very unique to a lot of other regions. I go to Santa Fe Indian Market and I look at alligator gar or an alligator snapping turtle, and they're like, "What in the world is this?" But it projects our cultural identity of the region that we come from. My little bear effigies. And on the left is what we call a tripod vessels. But again, you can see this came from an anthropomorphic shape. It was an animal and abstracted over time to just have 3 feet. This is also influenced from Peruvian pottery. This is actually a rattle. Our bipod and tripod pieces would have rattles in the feet, so they were used in ceremony. Although I take the pieces and enlarge them, so whereas that piece would be like a foot tall at max, this one is almost 2 feet. It is in the Western Heritage and National Hall of Fame in Oklahoma. Some more effigy pieces. On the left is a really good example of a different type of our pottery that is utilitarian. So that piece would have probably been used for serving dignitaries or guests to our villages. Whereas it is fancy, it's still just utilitarian and a lot thicker because it probably was cooked in. I like the one on the left here. This is what we call tail riders. It's kind of unique to a lot of Mississippian and southeastern tribes where it's not always a duck, but sometimes a very vague animal or spiritual being that has something on the tail. Sometimes it's an insect or another turtle. On this one, I kind of made it the thinking man. Like, what am I doing here on the back of this turtle or duck? But um, you can tell stories with this. This is my foray into actually starting to make statements with pieces rather than them just being vessels. Because I feel like there's a lot that you can say with a traditional vessel, like the one on the right, and the spirals representing rolling water as a Caddo symbol, which also is a symbol of the cycle of life. So you can tell a lot, but with representational work, you can get a story or a statement across a lot easier, a lot faster. It relates to people. This is one of the largest pieces I had created. It was 3 foot long alligator gar. This was crazy to fire in a traditional firing. I literally had to light fires on both ends while it was sitting on the ground. And I just moved the fire slowly along as it fired till we got to the middle. Um, and it lived through the firing, which was crazy. And because some don't. And and then it's engraved after it's firing. This used to be at the Dallas Museum of Art until some crazy person broke in and destroyed it. It's been replaced since then. This is the inspiration for the work, the traditional alligator gar piece in a private collection. It's only about a foot and a half long, I think. We did do human effigies, head pots, little people pots. That's what I call them. We made ear spools. Which I think in today they call them gauges or whatever, where you enlarge your earlobe to put them in. Caddos were some of the first gaugers in the New World, and their ear would be gauged about this big. They were gigantic. So, what my brother was asking, "You gonna gauge your ears?" I was like, "No." So my little alternative here is to make some modern earrings or whatever. But yeah, they were made out of clay. They were made out of wood. This one is in I think the Houston Museum of Natural History with the copper that was in Boston or repoussé onto it and then aged. I make gorgets. So a big southeast. It's big a lot of, among a lot of tribes that dealt with the English that had the what they call gorgets, like this one. Um, And so what is cool is before contact, Caddos and southeastern tribes would make gorgets that were round or oval out of mussel shell, all kinds of different shell, and they were engraved. And then during contact, the English and probably the French also had gorgets, which were from a holdover from ancient armory, but now, for officers to wear. And being as that our tribal leaders are the ones that wore gorgets, and same for the people that the colonizers that we met, wore the same. We did a holdover, and then we started using other materials, and then they started taking on the kidney shape and were made of German silver. So I make mine in clay or all different shapes, but it's just kind of an ode to the history of gorgets. And again, representational imagery uh, carved on them in order to tell stories of our cultural identity or a statement that I'm trying to get across. And moving into, reinterpretations of pieces. The one on the right is our ancient piece. The one on the left is my rendition, but with telling the story, the Caddo story of the flood. So it kind of goes in stages from the bottom up, telling the whole story, which I can tell later. But again, instead of it just being a vessel with decoration that have symbolic meanings, now we're actually getting into telling full-on stories and making connections. One of the things I heard someone talking about before was that whole, I think it was Holly Wilson talking about how when she grew up, you never really saw your tribal work in museums, and that's true for me as well. Never when I was growing up were there any Caddo pieces in museums except for maybe a couple over here in the glass that were burial items that everybody kind of just walked past. Um, Certainly never any contemporary artists living that made any artwork. And so that is a huge thing for me. And that's why I really strive for museums and exhibitions is getting Caddo and contemporary Caddo voices and statements in front of people so that the next generation or the youth growing up or my daughter see these things and they learn about their cultural identity. Just as an aside, so many Caddos grow up in the poverty area of Binger, Anadarko, Oklahoma, and don't really learn the whole story of the cultural identity. Sadly, a lot grow up with modern Americans teaching them or the TV teaching them, so they think they wear headdresses or that they you know um, grew up in teepees, and that's not our identity. So it's kind of sad seeing these stories as me trying to educate not just the public but our youth. So I started moving into more representational works. This is teaching, right? This is our grass house and our arbors beside one of our 30-40 foot cypress log canoes with the animals that go around it on top of a very traditional shape and symbolism of water, rolling water. Again, this piece is in the Idlejohn Museum of Art. Then from that, I went even further and started getting into representational work using traditional forms and methods. These are hand dug clay and pit fired the old way, even the chains. This one's restricted emergence, just talking about the limitations of minorities and underrepresented communities having a hard time, I guess, making it or making statements or being seen and heard. This is in the Permanent Museum of the Chickasaw Nation. With these forms, I was able to, go even further and start telling people about my life or my experiences or the experience of Native American artists growing up. So the right has to do with alcoholism within Native communities. The beer can and the pendulums represent how much limited time you have if you continue this tradition. But on the left is, ideas are all chained together. So they just form a ring of these traditional works. And then from there, I started getting in galleries in Santa Fe, and we started talking about indigenous futurism, which is a native art movement that has to do with reclamation of pop art as native art, showing that native art is also fine art, showing that it is also pop art. One of the things I always talk to people about is, well, when I was growing up as a native, I watched Star Wars. So Star Wars is part of Native culture, is part of American culture, is pop art. So the indigenous futurism movement has a lot to do with showing our influence or our voices or taking back cultural appropriation from pop art and movies and culture. So I started moving into this direction, which was very natural for me as a Caddo because we made effigy pots. So these are simply head or effigy pieces in a pop art form. And I always try to give meaning within the pieces rather than just blatantly, copying pop art. So each one has its own very special meaning. In the beginning, I started by pairing the pieces together. So you get a very, contemporary indigenous futurism piece with BB-8 here, but it shows you its cultural reference with a very typical Caddo water bottle, um, and also with the materials and methods. So the traditional piece is hand dug clay with mussel shell and pit fired, whereas BB-8 is commercial clay that is still hand built and hand burnished, but kiln fired and then smoked and then engraved. So you get modern methods, which also speaks to the fact that Native Americans are not supposed to be put in a box. And it's called, I think it's colonial gaze is what they're calling it now, where it's like, um, does your work look Indian, or does it is it that nostalgia native work? Are we always supposed to create the ancient stuff, or are we free to move forward in our work? So that's another purpose behind this kind of work. R2 is a perfect example of an effigy pot, a tripod piece, and a seed pot. So Caddos would make this shape, which was like a bullet upside down shape with a hole in the top, and it's called a seed pot. We'd put our seeds in it. The tiny hole was to be able to stop it so that bugs couldn't get in, and we'd hold that until the next season to replant our crops. But what is a seed but a carrier of knowledge, for the next generation and keeping you alive? And so that's kind of what R2 is. He's just a big canister of knowledge, um, and he passes it on. And this one's juxtaposed with a tripod traditional piece. See here. Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Um, this one is a very natural head pot. Ohio is the father. This piece on the right is in the permanent collection of the Autry Museum in California for their current, ongoing right now, Indigenous Future exhibition. It is huge, put on by the Getty Foundation. So I suggest you look it up. This piece is in the, I think they renamed it. I cannot remember the new name of the Snipe Museum of the Notre Dame in Indiana. This one's in the Minneapolis Institute of Art. This one's can be kind of abrasive. It's the Catholic Imperial Walker. We won't get into. There's more to it. But this is representative of some work I'm being commissioned to do for Crystal Bridges in their permanent collection. This is the book on Indigenous Futurism. If you want to learn more about it, if you want to learn more about Caddos, this is definitely the book to read first, written by Caddos. So very, very briefly, down in the exhibition, two of the main pieces. One is very Indigenous Futurism. The Scout piece is a mixture of traditional and commercial materials and methods. The idea behind it is, if you are familiar with Native Americans, some of them call each other the Scouts, meaning you are working for the enemy. And that's what that Imperial droid stands for. So that's what is behind that piece. Again, sometimes my pieces are pretty abrasive. And then the other piece that is down there is an effigy, which is very traditional, but it's a very important piece that has to do with the reverence and the thankfulness for the corn, one of our ancient methods of life giving for our tribe. And my socials, my website, if you want. And please contact me if you have any questions, and then I'll take any questions that you have now. Thanks. But yeah,
Does anyone have any questions? And I'll see if
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's so the pieces that we made extremely thin, they were more ceremonial, right? So they weren't used for cooking and serving. So they are kind of fragile. Uh, but using the same material and methods just a little thicker or firing a little longer, I do demonstrations of cooking with the same vessels. So they're usable, but I mean, they can be delicate depending on how thin they are. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Although some of the pieces that you've seen that are ancient and that are so thin have lasted like 2,000-3,000 years. So they're robust enough, I guess. Yes, but engraving, yes. Right. So there's two different terms just to be clear. Like carving is incising is like digging deep designs into like leather hard clay. That's done before firing while it's leather hard. But engraving is etching. Some people call it sgraffito, but it's different from sgraffito. But it's really is engraving using what we would traditionally use is chipped flint, really sharp. But I just use a metal spike now. But that's done, yeah, after it's fired. Um, and that is the traditional Caddo way of doing it. So yeah. No. So the traditional works with that clay fire to bonfire temperatures, which is 1200, 1300 Fahrenheit. Yeah. And it only takes them like 30 minutes to fire.
You're like the point is that you're scratching through the dark surface to
Yes.
get to the lighter.
Yeah. And they're functional because we cook with them.
Cesar, did you have a question? Oh, I thought you had your hand up. Did you have a question? No. Oh, I think we're gonna go after lunch, right? Okay. Does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a gorget. Yeah. This is made when my Chickasaw friends with the Caddo turkey is my logo because I used to sing the turkey dance for the tribe. Yeah, same thing. It's gorget. This one's made with the German silver. Like,
Okay. We have one more question. Sorry, guys. Can't see the. Kevin says, as a cultural storyteller, have you ever thought about writing short stories that would parallel your stories?
yes, actually, I have. I got a grant last year for First Peoples Fund to write. I don't really typically write, but a story did come to me, which would be creating a new Caddo story, which we haven't done in probably hundreds of years. So I've written it. We're in the process of illustrating it, and I plan to release it next year. So, yes. Thank you.